B'ezrat Hashem, today in Masechet Shabbat, we are starting Mem Gimel Amud Aleph at Rav Yosef Amar, which is about 5 lines down the page. Mem Gimel Amud Aleph. And we're going to have today really 2 parts. We're going to have the opinion of Rav Yosef in the Shita of Rav Chisda, and then we're going to have Rav Yitzchak, who's cholek on Rav Chisda that we had last week, and we'll have questions on both of them. That's really what we're going to do today. So let's just remember where we're holding here. We're holding here like this. We had a Mishnah in Membet Amud Bet, which said you're not allowed to place a kos under a candle to catch the oil on Shabbat. So hold on. Well, hold on. There's 2 reasons. You're not allowed to put the cup under the candle to catch the oil. So that's what the Mishnah had said. Now, there were 2 reasons Rashi told us. One of them actually is what we mentioned last week in Rabbah, and the other one is today we're going to do in Rav Yosef. What were Rabbah and Rav Yosef coming to explain? So they were actually not directly addressing our Mishnah. They were talking about Rav Chisda. Because what did Rav Chisda say? Rav Chisda said that there's a chiluk if you are putting the box to catch the egg that the hen laid, or if you're covering the egg after it was laid. Remember, this is what Rav Chisda said.
Because of the location.
So he said like this: if you're putting the box to catch the egg so it shouldn't fall and break, asur. If you're putting it over the egg that people shouldn't step on it, it's mutar. So last week, Rabbah came and told us, what's the pshat? So Rabbah understood there's a yesod, you're not allowed to move a mukhan item, a mutar item, letzorech muktzeh. Means you're not allowed, it's nothing to do with kovei makom. This is reason number 1, which is Rabbah said you're not allowed to move a prepared item, means an item that's permitted to use on Shabbat, like a kos, you can make coffee. But if you're moving it letzorech muktzeh, that's asur. So therefore he said like this: even though there is such a yesod, the rabbis relaxed it. They were lenient if it's something that's davar matzui, if it's a common situation.
And we give the whole
so let's just explain how that works now. The hens didn't usually lay eggs falling down a slope. So there, to move the box to catch the egg, you're not allowed. But when they laid it in the ashba, which was normal, you're allowed to cover it, because again, even though you're not allowed to move a mutter item, letzorech muktzeh, for davar matzui, they said it's permitted. Now let's put it back in the Mishnah. How does this work in the Mishnah? Since the oil is muktzeh, therefore you're not allowed to put a kos underneath it, because you're moving the mutter item, letzorech an asur item. It's davar matzui. It's not davar matzui. Why is it not davar matzui? That it drips oil.
Usually,
Rashi says it's not so much oil, so people don't care. Tosfot says because usually if there was oil dripping, you'd put a cup before Shabbat. So therefore, either way, that's how Rabbah explained Rav Chisda and back in the Mishnah. But again, according to him, the whole issue we're dealing with here of moving the cup for the oil or moving the box for the egg is asur litaltel davar amutar letzorech davar asur. Okay? Now Rav Yosef says different pshat. Rav Yosef says what you were just saying. Rav Yosef says the chiluk in Rav Chisda, in his psak, it's not based on that yesod that you're not allowed to move a mutar item for an asur item. It's a different yesod. The yesod is that when you put that box to catch the egg, when the egg lands in it, what's going to happen? It becomes a basis, it becomes a base for something that is muktzeh. Now that it's a base for something that's muktzeh, you can't move that anymore. So it's being kovea, exactly, it's kovea that from being mukhan, permitted to move, now being asur to move. And as Rashi added, it's boneh, which is like a chidush atzum. You're not, with teeth, like you're not actually putting cement in, but it's like you're kovea makom for this item, because before it was mukhan and you could move it. Now it's asur and you can't move it. Memela, that would be asur. However, if you just cover the egg with it, it's not touching. So Rav Yosef's opinion is there's no problem to move it letzorech davar asur. The problem is to make it not movable afterwards. So if it's just covering it, it's not touching, it's not a basis, you'd be allowed to move it afterwards. Memela, that's going to be mutar.
How do you make this chiluk?
What's beautiful chiluk?
Without basis, you are able to move it or not move it.
Exactly. He holds the whole issur that Rav Chisda is talking about, and we'll put it back in the Mishnah in a minute, is that you're not allowed to levatel davar me'echano, which means to take away the status of being allowed to move something that was allowed to be moved before.
The cup on the egg.
Correct.
Now
you could pick it up still.
It's not like attached to the floor.
Exactly. That's the point. You're allowed to move it. The attached to the floor is only because it becomes asur. This hasn't become asur. Versus where it catches it in the basket, there it's a basis for davar, so you can't move that anymore. And let's put it back in the Mishnah now. If the cup, to move it, litzorach davar asur, is not a problem. But what is a problem? Now that it has oil that's muktzeh, you made it not able to be moved. So everybody understands, let's get this very clear. Rabbah holds the whole problem we're discussing here is nothing to do with koveya, that's not the inyan. And there's a heter for davar matzoi that you're allowed. That's what the Chachamim said. Rav Yosef is learning Pshat and Rav Chisda, and the chiluk is, it's not, you're allowed to move davar mutar letzorch davar. So that's not a problem. Not an issue. The only issue is that you're not allowed to be kovea something that was mutar me'echano to be muktzeh, to be not movable anymore.
Sounds like tata gavar, because the base.
It's not exactly tata gavar. It's a different issue. Tata gavar is by heat. That's heat cold.
But the bottom is basically take over. If the bottom is the basket,
right?
So if the bottom is the egg, mutar.
I hear you, meaning the basis for davar asur. Okay, so now we have two different ways of understanding the chiluk of Rav Chisda. Okay, let's continue. Let's see this inside now. And we're going to go through the same questions. We went through all of those questions on Rabbah. We're going to go through on Rav Yosef. That's what we're going to do. But again, they're both explaining the shita of Rav Chisda, and we put it back in the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Rav Yosef Amar, top of Mem Gimel. What is the reason of Rav Chisda? It's because you're nullifying a vessel from its use before. Meaning is that beforehand you could move that basket. Now that there's an egg that fell inside of it, you can't move it because it's a basis for muktzeh. But in the case when you flipped over the basket, you could still move it, so that's not a problem. And back in the Mishnah, when the oil goes in the cup, it becomes muktzeh. You're not allowed to move it anymore. That's the problem. It's not a problem, but stam, it's not a problem to move it l'davar, so it's not a problem. Okay, so let's go through the kashas we went through on Rabbah. Now we're going to go through on Rav Yosef. Abaye asked the question against Rav Yosef. Now Rav Yosef was his Rebbe. Rav Yosef. Rabbah and Rav Yosef were both his Rebbe, actually. So Abaye turned to Rav Yosef and he said again, let's go through the Braitot and Mishnayot. So Braita number 1, it says, Chavit shel tevel shenishbera. We said like this, if you had a barrel of tevel, so you had wine that was tevel. Tevel is the Trumot and Maasrot were not taken off yet. Now tevel is muktzeh because it's a Asur D'Rabbanan to take off
in Shabbat.
Trumot and Maasrot on Shabbat.
But the thing says it's not muktzeh.
What?
The tevel himself, it's muktzeh.
It is, because muktzeh means it's not usable, and you can't drink this on Shabbat because you're not allowed to take off Trumot and Maasrot on Shabbat, midrabanan.
It's not allowed?
No, the point is, it is muktzeh, meaning it's not usable on Shabbat because you can't take off Trumot and Maasrot on Shabbat. It's like metaken maneh, it's like fixing it up. So therefore, the wine is muktzeh, its tevel is muktzeh. So if the barrel breaks and it starts to spill out, mevi kli acher, you're allowed to bring another kli, umeneach tachta, to catch it. So says the Gemara, what do you see? The kli is going to get filled with muktzeh and you're not going to be able to move it. So you see there's no problem about tel davar me'echano. That kli now can't be moved anymore.
We said it usually because it's new barrels, they break.
What does that do for you? That only helps you. Excellent. That only helps you in the Shita of Rabbah. Says the problem is you're not to move a kli for davar asur. But Rav Yosef doesn't hold to that whole inyan. He holds you could move it the davar asur. What you're not allowed to do is levatel kli me'echano, levatel muchan me'echano. That's the problem. And that doesn't help you in this case. Davar matzoy doesn't help you. It's still levatel davar me'echano. Very important. No, Matam, you just said very important is that kula is only within the shita of Rabbah, who says the issue is you're not allowed to move something that's mutar letzorech davar asur. Rav Yosef doesn't hold that whole shita. He holds asur levatel davar me'echano. Doesn't make a difference if it's matzoy or not. You're not allowed to move davar me'echano. Period. Yeah, you're not allowed to levatel davar me'echano. What does that help you?
The purpose of the barrel is to carry the wine.
The kli that has the wine in it now can't be moved because the wine is muktzeh. So that's you're mevatel davar me'echano. You see, it's mutar.
But the barrel is no'ad to be filled with wine. So how you mevatel the kli?
The
Because
kli, the yain is muktzeh. And now it's in a kli, and you're not allowed to move that kli anymore. You're not allowed to move it anymore. So the Gemara says...
Nothing to do with matzui.
Nothing to do. He doesn't hold of that kula. That's only Rabbah. Rabbah holds of that, right?
So what do you hold? One second. What's Rabbi hold? What's the...
Rav Yosef holds asur levatel davar me'echano. And therefore, now that...
Unless...
There's no unless.
So in his case, when you want to put the barrel, how where is the petach that he gives?
There's no, you're not allowed. That's the kasha. So Abai asks, you see there's a braita that says you're allowed to put the kli to catch the wine. It's mevatel davar me'echano, kasha and Rav
But
Yosef.
I saw something on Shabbat, it's different, this tevel. I saw something on Shabbat, no?
Oh, so hold on. So what's the answer? Listen to this good. The answer is, the isser to take off trumot and masot is what?
The Rabbanan.
Let's say somebody went and he took off trumot and masot. Is it mitukan?
No.
It is mitukan.
Okay.
It is mitukan. It's not isur deoraita. It's isur deorabanan. It's like mitaken maneh, but it's not isur deoraita. So therefore, since if somebody but it's more than patur. It's mitukan, means that is not tevel anymore. Now it's able to be drank. Since theoretically, if somebody took off trumot and masot, it would be effective. So memela, it's not really considered muktzeh. It's a chidush. It's not considered muktzeh because theoretically, avar ve'asa, if he went and he did it, it would be mutar. After again, it's the avad, but let's see inside. Amarle, 1 second. Amarle, Sir Rav Yosef, Shabbat Kalvaya. I don't hear the kasha. He said, Tevel muchan hu etzel Shabbat. Really, tevel is considered muchan. It's not considered muktzeh by Shabbat. She'im avar v'tiknu. It's a chidush. But if somebody went and he took off drumot and masot, which is a asur d'rabanan, mitukan, it would still be fixed up. So therefore, the Gemara says you can't look at this wine as mamish muktzeh. Mamish muktzeh means is that it's asur to use and there would be no benefit. There is a theoretical benefit you'd get if somebody would go do an asur d'rabanan. You'd be allowed to benefit. Memela, it's not considered levatel davar me'echano because it's really still containing wine that's theoretically able to be permitted. So it's not a kasha on Rav Yosef. Okay, good, answered that.
But let me just get it straight 1 second because I a little bit lost track. According to Rabbah, we're talking about shita that is following Rav Chisda with davar matzui.
They're both explaining Rav Chisda.
I understand. Rabbah is explained by according to davar matzui,
which means Rabbah holds the issue of bichlal. We're talking about is asur letaltel davar mutar letzorach davar asur. That's it. That's the shita. And the heter would be davar matzui. Fine. Rav Yosef says nothing to do with that. You're allowed to move something that's mutar letzorach davar, so that's not the problem. The problem is if you remove it from its ability to be moved after, that's a problem. So here, when it's containing the egg, that's a problem because now you can't move it anymore.
Containing the wine,
right?
Maybe part, but the tevel is different.
So Sheila, how are you going to be able to move the egg?
No, you can't.
You can't. That's the problem. And you're mevatel davar me'echano.
We spoke about the oil in the beginning, right? And then we gave like...
Hold on, we're going to go through all the kashas. Let's see. That was question number 1. Let's just go through. So Tashma, let's go through another kasha. I'm going to go through the same Braitot and Mishnayot we asked on Rabbah. We're going to go through here. But you can't give the same teretz as Rabbah because he doesn't hold of this matzui heter, right? So Tashma, let's go through the next one. They added in Tashma, it's a proof. Notnin kli tachat haner lekabel nitzotzot. We had this also last week. You're allowed to put a cup under a fire, a lamp, a wick, in order to catch the sparks that are flying out. Now, the way we're understanding is sparks are muktzeh. It's not a muchan, it's not permitted, and you're allowed to catch it in the kli. So you see, even though it's mevatel the kli me'echano, that's the assumption we're going with here, it's still mutar, kashan Rav Yosef.
Well, maybe it's a sort yes or not, it's not for sure.
But even so, if it's, no, let's say you see sparks coming in, you see it. So the Gemara answer is very simple. Amar Afuna Bered of Yeshua, nitzotzot in bahen mamash. Sparks, it doesn't have any real essence to it. What is a spark?
It's not going to burn out.
It sparks, and then it just, you're trying to make it that it doesn't damage something, right? The point is, the spark isn't going to settle in the kli and be there that makes it muktzit to move after the fact. And therefore, you could still move it after, theoretically. It's not a real muktzeh problem, like the wine that's going to sit, or the oil that's going to sit in it. Memela, you're not mevatel, davar me'echano, it's not a problem. Okay. Let's go to the next question. Question 3. This is, again, a braita. It said like this. Sorry, it's a Mishnah Kuf Nun Aleph. It says, V'chein kol ra shenishbara. Remember, we had this last week. If you have a roof beam broke, It says in the Braita, "Somchin ota b'safsal o ba'arukot amita." You're allowed to put under it so that it doesn't fall more. Support a bench or the beam of a bed, the side of a bed. So you see what? Wait a second. When you do that, what ends up happening is the mutter bench that you could move before, now it's on something muktzeh is on it, and you can't move it anymore. So you see mevatel davar mechano.
But maybe it's not separate completely the Korah. So you just support it, just give it a...
The moment if
you take it off, it's gonna fall? No.
It is. No, well, okay, I hear what you're saying.
Really
but I'm thinking if it's touching, which we're assuming right now, it's pushing against it, that makes the item now supporting muktzeh, you're not allowed to move it anymore. So you see you're allowed to do vatel davar mechano. This safsal now it's batel mi.
But maybe again, it's not sitting inside really, just attached.
Oh.
It's
so
not
the Gemara
really like
answers the Rafi. The Gemara answers the Rafi. What do you mean? It's loose. It's loose, meaning it's not really touching.
Yeah.
It's just there so that if chas v'shalom something happens,
just to give it support. But what happens if it's full? Then
that's a good question. But what we're saying is what you're allowed to do is to put something underneath, not actually touching it directly, because then it's not mevatel mehechano.
The devil and the nitzozot, it makes sense, but here there is a good chance that the safsal will be moving.
I hear what you're saying.
Fall,
I hear.
You're not going to be able to
Maybe
move.
you have to make a cheshbon and figure out what's going to happen actually. And the Gemara says the Rafi, it's loose. The ibai shakile, that if you wanted you could take it. Meaning it still isn't batel meichano. That's the point.
It's
the same yesod. It's the same yesod.
It's not solid.
It dwelling inside the davar mutar, and you make it davar asur.
Let's go. Let's go to the next kasha. Okay, so Tashma. Go to the next kasha. It's a Mishnah Mitzvah Beitzah. It says like this: Notnin kli tachad hadelef b'Shabbat. Yeah, this is also on Rabbi. We said like this: you have a leak coming in from the roof. You're allowed to put a kli to catch the water. Now, what we're assuming is the water that's coming in is dirty. If it's dirty, you can't drink it, it's muktzeh. The kli catches dirty water, mevatel me'echano. So the Gemara answers, bedel efara'oi. No, it's a leak that you could drink, meaning it's clean water. Okay, you have some system, it's clean water. Memela, it's catching water that is usable. It's not muktzeh, and therefore it's permitted. Right? Now, you have different pshat in the Mishnah, meaning it does not a kasha, so it's not mevatel me'echano. Beautiful, fine. Now, Rabbah could have said the same answer, by the way, but Rabbah instead said the sfarav davar matsui. So therefore, that was a common thing, meaning it was a new roof and it leaks. He could have said the same thing, but Rav Yosef says it's no problem. Question 5. Raita says, Tashma, kofinet asal lifnei ha'efochin, shi'alu v'yirdu. Now, what do you have here? You have efochin, which are the young birds, chicks, and you have the nest. And the problem is they can't get back up into the nest. It gets very interesting. So what you want to do is turn over a kli that's like a step so they could hop back into their nest. Now what's the problem here? Let's stop for a second. What's the potential problem here?
She's gonna stuck on the step.
You're putting the kli. Efochin are muktzeh. Why are they muktzeh? Because live creatures are intrinsically muktzeh.
Okay.
Meaning if it was shechted. What? Live creatures. Live creatures are intrinsically be'etzem. Intrinsically. It's be'etzem. The mahut shelo is muktzeh. Why? Because it's not shachut, so therefore you can't eat it. It's Shabbat. So it's just be'etzem, not usable for anything. It's muktzeh. Now pets is a shayla that gets into a different story. But live creatures in general, your chicks are not your pets.
Cats.
But pets is maybe a different story. But let's say you're a farm animal, it's not your pets. This is livestock, fine. But kids, what's the point? The point is, when you turn over the kli, you want to turn it over as a step that it can get back into its nest. Problem is, it's going on that. It's mevatel me'echana. You can't move it anymore. You were just saying something. That's very good. Excellent. So excellent.
It's usable, but in a second after, he can take it already.
Says the Braita. You're allowed to turn over a basket that it can go in and out of its nest. It's mevatel the basket me'echano. So the Gemara answers, Kasavar mutar letaltelo. No. This Braita holds it's mutar to take it after. Why is it mutar to take that basket after? Because there's no chick on it. When it goes on the basket, okay, then it's holding davar muktzeh. But afterwards it goes up or it goes down. It's not muktzeh anymore, so it's mutar letaltel. It's not mevatel me'echano. That's not a problem at all. Says the Gemara, but it's not a good answer. Because Ve'atanya, this is really a side point, but Ve'atanya, problem is we have a Braita that says, Asur l'taltelo. It says, once you put the basket like that, you're not allowed to move it anymore. So kanireh, it is mivatel me'echano. So how can you put it in the first place? Oh, so the Gemara answers be'odan alav. It says, no, when the Braita, that first Braita, the second Braita actually, we quoted, Asur l'taltelo means if the chick is still on it, so then you're not allowed to move it. But since we know it's going on or off, it's going to be mutar after. Says the Gemara, we have a third Braita. Va'atanya, but the third Braita says, Af al pi she'ein odan alav asur. So now we have a kasha, because the third Braita says, even if the chick does not remain on it, kanireh, it's still going to be asur. So you see, you're allowed to mivatel, davar me'echano. How's it mutar?
No.
Kasha. Kasha on Rav Yosef.
Either you attached it.
You attached what?
The bench or whatever that you put, so you really never tell it. But if it's loose like the bench...
What do you mean you attached it?
If it's attached to the cage, obviously you never tell. Right, like we said with the cup, if you flip it, but it's loose, so
what
you
does
can
the
pick
attach
it up.
have to do with anything? What does that have to do?
Once it's attached, you cannot pull it out, right?
Well, what does that have to do? I don't understand.
If I can pick it, just pick it up.
There's nothing, there's no muktzah on it. You should be allowed to pick it up. The kasha is, we're saying that it goes up and down, so it's not going to be on it for the whole time. But we just said in a third Braita, asur l'taltelo afilu shelo odan alav. So that's a kasha. What's the pshat in that? But still, who cares? If it's not on it, then it should be mutar. So the Gemara says this has to do, very interesting. When it says afa pi she'en odan alav, listen to this, we'll see it inside in a minute. She'en odan alav means now it's not on it, on Shabbat. But Ben Hashmashot going into Shabbat, there was a chick on it.
No.
What does it mean? It means during Ben Hashmashot, according to Rabbi Yehuda, we'll see, that's the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, if there is a muktzeh on the item, means it was muktzeh at the time of entire Ben Hashmashot, it loses the ability to be used the entire Shabbat.
But Rabbi,
so 1 second, so let's just put it in. So when the third Braita says Afal pi she'enot enan odan alav, what it means to say is, even though now on Shabbat there's no chick on it, since during Ben Hashmashot there was a chick on it, it caused it to be muktzeh for all of Shabbat. Now this is only the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who is machmir. He has a much more extensive definition of muktzeh. Rabbi Shimon does not agree to this, and we'll speak more about that later. Rabbi Shimon is more lenient, but let's read that inside.
Because it's different.
Rabbi Avo, the Odan alav kol ben hashmashot. The Braita means that the chick was there for the entire ben hashmashot. Migu, and this is the yesod, it's a big yesod. Migud itkatzai le ben hashmashot, itkatzai le kule yoma. Since it became muktzeh during the time of Ben Hashmashot, Rabbi Yehuda says, whatever its status is during Ben Hashmashot, it determines heter or isser for the rest of Shabbat. So therefore, like this, it comes out. If the chick was not there during all of Ben Hashmashot,
so
it would be mutar. You're not mevatel meichano, seemingly. If it's there during Ben Hashmashot, which is the way we're understanding, even though it's not there on Shabbat after, it is kovea the status of the item throughout Shabbat.
What's the difference?
So now it becomes asur l'taltelo.
This was supposed to prepare from Ba'od Yom, and then during Shabbat I want to move it. But if I put it in Shabbat, and then there was a chick on it, and then it came down of it,
exactly.
It's mutar?
Exactly. If it wasn't like that,
is the timeline
during Ben, it's very important.
Lama?
The status of an item is determined according to Rabbi Yehuda during Ben Hashmashot. And what does it mean? What does it mean? It means if this thing was mutar l'taltel during Ben Hashmashot, it's also according to Rabbi Yehuda. Even a chick goes on it because it's going to go off it, and then it's mutar.
You just mentioned 4 different situations in Shabbat.
Correct.
What's the difference if it's Ben Hashmashot then?
Again,
Shabbat Ben Hashmashot,
exactly that, because during Ben Hashmashot, the status of muchan or muktzeh becomes determined. Is it muktzeh or is it muchan? During Ben Hashmashot, that's what is mugdar in halacha. Memela, if the chick is on it during Ben Hashmashot, it becomes an item that's muktzeh for Shabbat
doesn't
as
make
well.
any sense. You're allowed to move it in Shabbat for the chick.
We'll
so you're not allowed to move it in Ben Hashmashot?
רבי יהודה הוא מחמיר, והוא סובר, אם האיידם הזה, בזמן, ב-18 דקות האלה, הוא היה מוקצה, האפרח ישב עליו, כל ה-18 דקות, אפילו שאני יודע שבשבת הוא יורד מזה, כל עוד זה היה מוקצה בין השמשות, בשבילו מוקצה כל השבת. אי אפשר לשתות, אבל זה רק רבי יהודה, אבל מה עוד דבר?
רבי שמעון חולק.
אבל כן, כי רבי שמעון יגיד לך, תקשיב לי, אני
יש פה
יודע...
דבר שאינו מתכוון?
I don't think it's to do with דבר שאינו מתכוון. So that's what comes out. Bekitzer, what comes out is like this. Let's wrap up what we got so far, because now we're going to have another shita.
זה בסיס לדבר האסור.
אבל בשבת עצמה, you can put it in the cage.
Correct.
And the chick will go up and go down, and then once...
Shma, why? Because when you put it on Shabbat, that's a mutter item. Mutar l'taltel item hazeh. The only problem is a chick's going to go on it. If that was something that's going to be kavua on it, that would be a problem. But if it's not going to be kavua on it, so then it's going to get off of it. That's not batel me'echano, it's mutar. There's a special chidush that if it's there during Ben Hashmashot, that's kovea the status for Shabbat. During Shabbat, it's not a problem.
That's according to Rabbi Yehuda.
Exactly, we're not saying it's machloket. Rabbi Shimon's cholek. Fine. But Bekitzer, what we just came out with is like this. We have Rav Chisda who makes a chiluk to put the basket to catch the egg or to cover the egg with the basket. We have two reasons to understand his shita. Either Rabbah says the problem is you're not allowed to move. You're not allowed to move.
begin with.
Davar mutar letzorach davar asur, and the only kula is davar matzui. And we have Rav Yosef
לא מבטל דבר מחנוך.
is that it's not a problem to move davar asur letzorach davar mutar. It's a problem levatel davar me'echano, which means before you could move it, and now you can't because there's muktzeh inside of it. Fine. Both of these shitot agree with Rav Chisda. Now we're going to have a shita that is cholek on Rav Chisda that says both cases are asur. You're not even allowed to put the... Rav Yitzchak's going to be machmir. He's going to be machmir. Rav Yitzchak's going to be machmir. He's going to say you're not even allowed to put the basket over the egg. Now, why is he going to say that? So Rav Yitzchak says like this, I be'etzem hold like Rabbah. I just don't hold of the kula of davar matzui.
Okay.
Vanta? I be'etzem hold like Rabbah, which means asur letaltel davar mutar letzorach davar asur, but I don't hold of the kula. Afilu davar matzui is asur. I don't hold that the chachamim were lenient by davar matzui. So therefore, even to cover the egg, that's also a problem.
So it's actually...
No, he doesn't hold of that. That's not the point. He doesn't hold of the Vatel Davar Mechano. He doesn't need to go there. He holds the problem is you're not allowed to move a mutter thing for something that's asur, for the chicken egg, which is muktzeh. I also don't hold of the kula of Davar Matzui, so memele, even to cover the egg with a basket is also asur.
And according to Rashi, what was the pshat? There was Davar Mechano.
Rashi was he's quoting the Gemara. Rashi was quoting Rabbah and Rav Yosef.
But Rashi says according to Davar Mechano.
It's two different issues.
And
yeah.
The other opinion is Davar Matzui. That's basically the two options.
Levatel Davar Mechano is Rav Yosef, and Rabbah holds Asur Tatel Davar Mutar Letzorach Davar Asur. Rav Yitzchak holds like Rabbah in Shita, but he doesn't hold the Kula of Rabbah. Means, which really the kula of Rav Chisda, meaning he doesn't hold that you're allowed to even cover the egg with a basket.
He's basically cholek on Rav Chisda.
He is cholek on Rav Chisda. That's what we're about to see. And we're going to go through the kashas on him too. Each one is going to be, let's go through the kashas. That's what we're going to see now. Amud Yitzchak. The last narrow line. Amud Yitzchak. Kishem she'en notnin kli tachat harnegor lekabel beitzata. Just like you're not allowed to put it to catch the egg. Kach ein kofin aleh kli b'shvil shelo tishaber. You're not allowed to put it so that the egg doesn't get stepped on either. Why? Kasavar, because Rav Yitzchak called Ein Kli Nital El Ledavar Nital B'Shabbat. You're only allowed to move a permitted vessel for a permitted permitted use. And the Gemara doesn't say this, but the Rishonim say, and he does not hold of the leniency of the kula of Davar Matzui. So therefore, even if the chicken or the hen usually lays eggs in the garbage, you're not allowed to cover it because that's not a kula that he subscribes to. Rabbah held of that kula, so he explained Rav Chisda that way. But Rav Yitzchak is cholek on that, and he says, Bichlal, you're not allowed to move davar mutar letzorach davar asur. Good? So now let's go through the kashas. So the Gemara says, Meiteveh, it's really a lot of this is review. We know the cases.
Repetitive, but...
It's different.
Three different explanations.
That's why we're asking the kashas again, because it's a different angle for each one of them.
It's amazing to see how each one of them may be the terutz.
Exactly. Each one gives a different explanation. Right, exactly. Meaning really, if you think about it, the way Rabbah explained these Mishnayot is matzui. The way Rav Chisda explained them is, it's not mevatel me'echano because it's going to go off or it's not touching, etc. But Rav Yitzchak now holds like Rabba, which is that you're not allowed to move davar mutar letzorch davar asur, but he also doesn't have the kula of davar matzui. So therefore, hello?
So sorry, I'm not from here, from New York.
All good.
Is there an art school that I can get
In the library.
In the library.
In the library.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Please.
Thank you.
So the Gemara says like this, Meiteve, let's go through the kashas now. And the Gemara doesn't even list the Mishnayot and Brayot. It says, Meiteve kol hani tiyufta. These are all questions, meaning it doesn't even list them. But all of those Mishnayot and Braytaot which imply that you're allowed to move davar mutar letzorch davar asur, those would all be a kasha and Rav Yitzchak. And you, Rav Yitzchak, can't answer that it's davar matzui because you don't hold of that kula. So how do you get out of those Mishnayot and Braytaot? Let's just take one example. You're allowed to cover the oil, the fire, so it doesn't burn the roof. You're allowed to cover. How are you allowed to move it with the cheres? It's not. And you can't tell me davar matzui. You can't tell me barrels break. You don't hold of that kula. So how do you answer up all those Mishnayot and Braytaot?
Could be a fire in the house.
We're assuming it's not sakana. If it is sakana, everyone holds.
No sakana.
So the Gemara answers Vishani and Rav Yosef and Rabbi Yitzchak would answer B'tzarich limkomo. Okay, so this is a very interesting chidush. We know on Shabbat you're not allowed to move something that's muktzeh. However, there is a leniency which is as follows: if you need the place. Now this isn't for all muktzeh, but for certain muktzeh items, if you need the space that the muktzeh is sitting on, you're allowed to move it because tzarich limkomo. Shinui, fine. You're allowed to move it b'kitzu because tzarich limkomo. You need that location. So you're not moving it for the item, you're moving it so you can have that space. Now listen good to this. Once you move that item, you could put it wherever you want. If I'm picking something up, I could put it somewhere else. It's fine. So it's the same thing here. Be'etzem, Rabbi Yitzchak says, I'm not allowed to move, let's say, the kli cheres, because it's moving it. If I'm moving it only to cover the fire, I wouldn't be allowed
I'm not
to.
moving
One second.
itself.
Even though the kli cheres is a mutter item, I'm not allowed to move it letzorech davar asur. But once I'm moving it because tzarich limkomo, so then already I'm allowed to put it letzorech davar asur. That's the chidush.
There's an
Evanta? Hello, Yochai. Evanta? You're not allowed to move something that's tzarich davar asur. But once you're moving the mutter item because tzarich limkomo, meaning you had this cup in a place that was tzarich limkomo, you needed to move because you needed the location. Once you're moving it because tzarich limkomo, you could also use it to cover davar asur, to prevent some sort of a davar asur from happening. Meaning something that's muktzeh. That's the idea.
You're allowed to move the muktzeh, the davar.
That's the yisod of muktzeh. Here, you should not be allowed to move the davar mutar letzorech davar asur. But we're talking about where the davar mutar was in a place that you want the location to be cleared. Once you're allowed to move it, tzarich limkomo, you could also, let's say, put the cheres over the fire so it doesn't burn the roof, etc. Once he doesn't hold of that svar. That's Rav Yosef. He doesn't hold of that. He only holds that asur letaltel davar mutar letzorech davar asur. But I'm allowed to put it there once I'm allowed to move it because tzarich limkomo. Let's take an example. We had said there's a fire, and you want to cover it with cheres. Now the problem is, if you're covering it with cheres, this kli, that you're moving davar mutar letzorech davar asur. He holds that's a problem. And Rabba said it's davar matzui, but we don't hold of that now. Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't hold of davar matzui. So he says like this: how would you be then allowed to move it? It seems to be kasha and Rabbi Yitzchak. The answer is it's a specific case. The case is where the cup or the bowl that you're using to cover the fire, to block the fire, is in a place that you want it cleared away. You want it cleared away. So we have a heter called tzarich limkomo. What does tzarich limkomo mean? Is that even something that's muktzeh,
it's not muktzeh.
This is not muktzeh, but it's asur to move it letzorech davar asur. But once you're allowed to move it because tzarich limkomo, you're also allowed to put it over the davar ha'asur. You're allowed to put it where you want.
So let's say
you wouldn't lechatchila be allowed to take the mutar vessel to cover the fire, but once you're allowed to move it for tzarich limkomo, you're allowed to use it to cover that. You can put it wherever you want. That's the point. That's the chidush that we're saying over here.
But it's not. But I don't understand one thing. This cheres is not muktzeh to begin with.
It's not, but it is a problem to move it letzorich davar asur. means you theoretically wouldn't be allowed to put it over the fire so that the roof shouldn't get burned, for example.
Because I need the space where it is.
It's a heter to move already. You could move it for that as well. That's a chidush.
So
it's not a normal muktzeh. It's not a gzeira of muktzeh, basically.
Yeah. But it's an item that I can move in Shabbat?
Correct.
So.
No, be'etzem you'd be allowed to move it mitchila, but you're not l'chatchila allowed to move it for davar asur. But once you're moving tzarich lemkomo, you're allowed to move it and put it there as well. Chidush. That's what comes out.
But according to him, it's davar hamatzui. According to him, it's mevatel kli mechano.
Correct.
And according to him, I can move it only if I can move it in Shabbat.
Correct.
But you also mevatel davar mechano.
He doesn't hold of that. He doesn't hold of that, Svara. He doesn't hold of that. That's not the problem. He doesn't hold of that issue.
So let's say I have a cup, I have a platter, I have a fork, I have a knife, things that normally I'm going to use in Shabbat.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm allowed to use them in case there is a fire, there is a leak, there is a...
If it was tzarich lemkomo, you'd be allowed to move it.
Tzarich lemkomo is what? That I can move it?
Tzarich lemkomo means that you have a table that you want to eat a meal on, just as an example, okay? Now there's something blocking it, so you want to move it. You want the place, you want the location for some use on Shabbat. Once you can move it for that, you're also allowed to move it and put it in the place that would be to serve as something that's asur. Let's continue. Tashma. Let's go to the next Braita. The Braita says, Achat beitza shenolda b'Shabbat v'achat beitza shenolda b'Yom Tov. Whether it's an egg born on Shabbat or Yom Tov, which means it's nolad. Ein metaltelin, you're not allowed to move it. Lo lechasot ba et hakli, not to cover a vessel. I guess they used to use eggs as a bottle cap. You can't take this davar that's nolad to cover a vessel as like a cap or a cover. V'lismoch ba kar'ei amita. It's very interesting. An egg is very strong. If you figure out exactly the points of the egg, you won't be able to break it.
You remember?
It's very interesting. People do science projects like this.
If an elephant can stop on the egg, you're not going to break it if it's like really the two peak.
The right places. So theoretically, if there's a short leg of the bed, you could stick it underneath to support. You're not allowed to do that either, again, because it's nolad. Aval, but this is the key, you are allowed to put a kli over it in order that it doesn't break. Now this is a clear kasha against Rav Yitzchak, because Rav Yitzchak says again, you're not allowed to move kli mutar letzorach davar asur, to put a cup of a bowl over it, a kli over it, shelo tishaber, it shouldn't be stepped on. That's clearly what he said is asur. So again, the Gemara answers, you have to say the same terutz, which is that the bowl is in a place that's tzarich lemkomo. Once you can move it for that, you're allowed to use it letzorach davar asur.
So basically, let's say right now my table is full.
Yeah.
So I want to remove something. Exactly. So now I have a heter to put it especially on the edge.
Even though usually you can't move it letzorach davar asur. Chidush. Tashma.
So it's tricking the system.
It's a loophole.
Because people will find out some loops.
It's a loophole. No, so it has to be really tzarich. No, it has to be really tzarich lemkomo.
You don't really need the place.
It's not tzarich lemkomo. It's
But now the table is full. I want to move this so I can put another book. Oh, because I need to move it now, I'm going to find
it has to be a real tzarich lemkomo.
I'm saying like the table is full and I want to remove it. So now I have an heter that I can actually put it next to the egg and it's going to be...
Yeah. It has to be a real tzarich lemkomo, exactly.
So מה ההבדל? בדיעבד או בלכתחילה?
Exactly.
זה ההבדל.
You're allowed. Tashma, let's go to the third kasha on Rav Yitzchak. It says like this. Posir machzalot al gabe avanim b'Shabbat. Avanim, stones, bichlal are considered muktzeh. Mats, machzalot, is... you sit on it. You use it for sitting.
Like rags.
I don't know if it's rags. Machzalot here means a mat.
Yeah.
It's like a soft mat. Yeah. People would sit on it, like a yoga mat. Think about it, like people would sit on it. So says the Braita, Posin machzalot al gabe avanim b'Shabbat. These stones, Rashi understands is you don't want them to get wet or to get dirty because then it would ruin them somehow. So you were allowed to spread a mat over them on Shabbat to protect them. Wait a second, how could the Braita say that? You're moving the thing that's mutar, that the machzalot is mutar because you could sit on it for the stones, which is muktzeh. So the Gemara answers, "Ba'avanim mikorzalot dechazin lebeit hakisei." The stones have some use and they're not muktzeh. What type of stones? They wipe themselves with it. Back in the day, they didn't have toilet paper. So the way they used to wipe themselves was they had these sharpened stones and they would clean themselves with it in the bathroom. So therefore, it's not muktzeh stones because they are usable for some purpose. Then mainly you could move the mats for the stones because it's not muktzeh. Yeah.
No, but they move them. They put the mat on the stone.
Over the stones so that the stones don't get damaged by water or by dirt. So, the stones are muktzeh. How can you move the mats for the muktzeh?
The stone is not muktzeh because I have a use for it.
So the answer the Gemara says is, we're talking about special stones, not stones for building or things like that. We're talking about stones that are used for the bathroom. So since there's a tzorech, it's not muktzeh, it's muchan, and therefore you can move the mats to cover. Tashma. Let's go to the fourth proof. Now this seems to be a very strong proof. What's levenim? Levenim is bricks. What are bricks used for? Building. Building is a muktzeh type of item. So says the Gemara, you see you're allowed to take the mats to cover the bricks, even though bricks are muktzeh, you're allowed to move davar mutar letzorech davar asur. So the Gemara answers no. We're not talking about bricks that are going to be used for building. That would taka be muktzeh. We're talking about bricks after they built the house. They left over some of these bricks, and those leftover bricks had some sort of a tzorech. What's the tzorech? The chazyan lemizga alayu. They were fitting to relax on it. After they would build and there were some bricks left over, Rashi says when they would relax, they would lean, they would relax on these bricks. So it was some bricks that actually had a tzorech, had a achana for Shabbat. Memela, you can cover it with the mats because it's not muktzeh. Tashma. Let's go to the fifth proof.
I lost
fourth
with
proof.
the bricks again.
Again, it's the same point. The kasha was that you see you're allowed to move the mat, letzorech the bricks, which is muktzeh. And the answer is no, the bricks have a muchan. It has a usable purpose, and therefore it's not muktzeh. What was the usable purpose? We're talking about bricks that are left over from building. What did they use them for?
But in that case,
they would
I
lean
can
on
find
it
for anything a use for Shabbat.
Again, it has to be some practical use. Rashi says they used to actually lean on these things on their side, on the left. There was some actual use for these items. Tashma, let's go to the fourth proof. This is a very interesting proof. This is really going to continue till the end of the day. Posin machzelet al gabe kaveret dvorim b'Shabbat. You have a beehive. A beehive. There's bees inside and there's honey inside of it. Okay? Now you don't want, as we're about to see, the rain or the sun to damage the bees or the honey inside. Fine. So you're allowed to cover the beehive with a mat on Shabbat. Posin machzelet al gabe kaveret dvorim b'Shabbat. Now the way we understand it now is like this. In the summer, chama means yimot chama. In the summer, to protect it from the sun. In the winter, to protect it from the rain. But the Braita says, ubilvad, as long as shelo yitkaven latzud. You see, you have to avoid a certain issue. If you cover it and it causes and you're intending to keep the bees inside, that would be a melacha called tzad. You're trapping. That you wouldn't be allowed to do. So as long as you're not intending to do tzad, it would be mutar to cover the beehive. It says the Gemara, wait a second. Bees are muktzeh. Again, a live creature, it's muktzeh. And if so, how can you move the machzelet, letzorech the bees and the beehive, which is a basis for the muktzeh, to cover it with that should be asur?
But it's not 100% covered.
Well, okay, I hear what you're saying, but still, the point is, you have to avoid the tzad problem, for sure. But the other issue is, you're moving the davar mutar letzorech davar asur. How could you do that? So the Gemara answers, no. The beehive is not muktzeh. Why is the beehive not muktzeh? Oh, because you have a use. Very good. Says the Gemara, there's honey inside the beehive. Since there's honey inside the beehive, you have a use for it. So you're not moving the machzelet for davar asur. It's actually the beehive is mutar. Why is it mutar? Because there's honey inside of it. So the Gemara says, wait a second. Hold on a second. We know, because we work on a farm, when is there honey inside of a beehive? When is the honey inside of a beehive?
When?
No, in the summer or in the winter? In the summer. We know, we work on a farm. So he says, wait a second. You want to tell me that in the summer, I understand what you're saying. But they don't have honey. So your pshat doesn't work in this braita because the braita said both.
But maybe
So your pshat doesn't work.
Maybe it does last longer. Maybe there is some beehive that are actually.
So the problem is Rav Ukva knew of bees. Apparently he worked on a bee farm, and Rav Ukva said, "I don't like your pshat." Amalei Rav Ukva Mimeishan Ravashi. Rav Ukva Mimeishan said to Ravashi, "Teinach b'imot hachama." This works in the summer, dika dvash, because that's when the honey season was, and therefore you could say the beehive is not muktzeh because there's dvash which you're going to take. But in the winter, there's no honey. How could you say that there's a heter to move the machzelet? So the Gemara says, even in the winter, when there wasn't really a honey harvest time, they would leave 2 rows of honeycomb for the bees. Rashi says, is that they could have food. They would leave over 2 chalot. Chalot doesn't mean bread. It means chalat dvash, like a honeycomb. 2 honeycombs so that the bees would have the capacity to nurture themselves throughout the winter. So
the bees eating?
And the bees are eating it or benefiting from it. So the Gemara says, therefore it's not muktzah because you could theoretically take that honey for yourself and you have a use for this honey even in the winter. Says the Gemara, but wait a second. The problem with that is, usually, you would leave those 2 chalot dvash for the bees. And if that's the case, even if afterwards you decided, I'm going to take from it, that was muktzeh when Shabbat started. Because usually that's used for the bees. That's in the winter they leave that so the bees can survive. So the problem is, assuming you didn't do any specific tanai before Shabbat, this would be muktzeh. Because that's not something that's mukhan, prepared, as that's usually used by the bees. In Cain, you can't tell me that there's some honey left over, because that's not honey that's considered mukhan. So the Gemara answers, no, the chashiv alayu. Rashi says, me'etmol. What happened is that usually you're right. People wouldn't touch this honey, they would leave this for the bees in the winter. So they could survive. What happened in this case in the Braita is, before Shabbat, on Friday, he thought about it. He thought that I want to take from the honey of these 2 chalot. Memela, that became mukhan. And since it's mukhan, you're allowed to take from it on Shabbat too. You're allowed to cover it with the mat. Because your machshava makes a difference. It means your machshava before Shabbat made it mukhan. Now it's not muktzah and you can cover it with a mat. Says the Gemara. Now this leads us to a very interesting question. Now pay attention. Let me speak it out and then we'll see it inside. What comes out is like this. How do you read that? Let's put it back into the Braita. The Braita says you're allowed to cover the beehive with a mat, but chama mipnei chama, b'gshamim mipnei gshamim, ubilvad shelo yitkaven latzud. Okay? The way we're coming out now, it's only mutar in the winter. If before Shabbat you thought I'm going to use those 2 chalot that are left over. So says the Gemara, wait a second. If that's true, the Braita should have said that. Meaning, the only Braita, the chiluk the Braita makes is to avoid the problem of tzad. Okay. But if what you're saying is true, it should have said, when is it mutar to cover it with a mat if before Shabbat you intended to take from that honey? But if you didn't intend to take from that honey before Shabbat, it should be asur. So why didn't the Braita write that chiluk? The Braita should have made that clear. It's the kasha the Gemara is about to ask. You're telling me the pshat in the Braita is something that's not very clear in the Braita at all. It should have said that. Ba'amed divarim amurim, that it's mutar, when he had machshava before Shabbat to benefit from it. Otherwise it's not. It's muktzeh. Says the Gemara, halo chashiva layumai, but let's say he didn't think about it before Shabbat. Asur, it would be muktzeh. If that's true, Hadetani, the Braita that says, Ubilvad shelo yitkaven latzud, all it says is, you just can't have intention to trap the bees. Liflug v'litni bedida. It should distinguish within itself. Means really what it should have said is, even without the tzad problem, you have a different problem. It should have been mechalek in the Braita. It should have said, when is it mutar to cover it because the beehive is not muktzeh? Ba'meh divarim amurim, keshechishev aleihen. Only where he had the intention to take it before Shabbat. Avalo chishev aleihen asur. The fact the Braita does not make that chiluk implies that your pshat is wrong. So the Gemara answers, no. Hakamash malan. The chidush of the Braita is, Af al pi shechishev aleihen. Means even if you have the machshava before Shabbat, that goes without saying.
Not gonna happen.
Ubilvad shelo yitkaven latzud. There still has to be not intention to trap the bees. So what we're coming at is like this. The way we're answering this first pshat in the Braita is that really the Braita means to tell you there's two conditions to cover the beehive. What are the two conditions? No, not exactly. Condition number one is it has to be that that's not muktzeh. Now in the summer that's great, but in the winter how is it not muktzeh? That you had machshava before. That's condition number one. Condition number two is, even if you had that machshava before Shabbat, you're still not allowed to have intention to trap the bees because that would be a tzad problem. Now let's stop for a second. Let's stop for a second. If that's the pshat in the Braita, we're going to have a problem. It's not going to fit either according to Rabbi Shimon or according to Rabbi Yehuda, because let's take it back. What is exactly the nidon here? What's the issues that we're dealing with here? If you don't have machshava before Shabbat, it's muktzeh, right? That follows the
to enjoy the chalot.
To take the chalot, because otherwise it would be assumed that it's for the bees. That is like the position of Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, Rabbi Yehuda extends the idea of muktzeh more than Rabbi Shimon. There is a machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. If you have an item that at Ben Hashmashot, it's an item that could have some use, but might not be usable, meaning it's something, this is a good example. This is a good example of it, which is, it's an example where theoretically you could benefit from it, but maybe it's going to be used for the bees. So Rabbi Yehuda holds, if you don't have dafka kavanah to use it, you're not allowed to benefit from that, it's muktzeh. Rabbi Shimon holds, you don't need that. You don't need that. The only way it would be asur according to Rabbi Shimon is if you dafka had kavanah before Shabbat, not to use it.
The only
way it would be muktzeh is if before Shabbat you dafka had kavanah not to use it. So it comes out, the necessity of kavanah is like Rabbi Yehuda. Atzorech shechishev, that he has to have this intention, is like Rabbi Yehuda. But the other Tanai we said about tzad, what is the case of tzad? Let's stop for a second and think about that. This is a classic case of the machloket Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, davar she'eino mitkaven. Why is it davar she'eino mitkaven? Why are you covering the beehive?
Because you want to protect the ani.
Are you covering it latzud?
No.
It might happen that you create tzad, right? But the point is, it's davar she'eino mitkaven. Now, what does the Braita say? Without shelo yitkaven, which is mashma what?
That they follow Rabbi Shimon.
That regarding davar she'eino mitkaven, mutar, like Rabbi Shimon, according to Rabbi Yehuda, davar she'eino mitkaven is asur. So it comes out that the two Tanaim in the Braita, the Tanai about having machshava is like Rabbi Yehuda, the Tanai about shelo yitkaven latzud is like Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says you can't learn the Braita like this because it comes out, it's half and half. It's not like either man da'am or legamre. Exactly. Let's see inside. Says the Gemara, Mani, who is the author of the Braita? Rabbi Shimon, if it's like Rabbi Shimon, let le muktzah. He doesn't hold it's a muktzah problem. You don't have to have machshava before Shabbat. Anyways, it's fine. And Rabbi Yehuda, if it's like Rabbi Yehuda, kilo mitkaven ma'have, even if you don't have intention to do tzad, it's still a problem because hadavar she'en mitkaven asur. It's davar she'en mitkaven. So the Gemara answer is no. The pshat's like this. It's really olam Rabbi Yehuda. Really, it's like Rabbi Yehuda. Ma'il bavad shelo yitkaven. What does it mean? Shelo yitkaven latzud. What does that mean? Shelo ya'asena kimtzuda. It means not that your intention is so important, because even if you didn't have intent, it would be davar she'eino mitkaven. It means the physical placement. When you put the mat, you have to do it in a way that it's not going to be tzad. How do you do it in a way that it's not tzad? De lishbok lehu ravcha. You leave over space. So that it shouldn't be trapped by default. Okay. So Rashi explains it means, what the Braita really means is like, it's really Rabbi Yehuda. That's why you have to have kavanah before Shabbat, so that it's not muktzeh, it's muchan. It's davar she'eino mitkaven, it's not davar she'eino mitkaven. It means, the Braita means that you have to put the mat in a way that it leaves open the door. You're not covering the door. If you do it like that, it's not tzad.
Like really, with the bench, same idea. You leave it loose. So anyway,
it's not tzad, that's the point. Since it's not tzad, it's going to be mutar. Chevra, you have 5 more minutes? 3 more minutes.
Yeah.
Let's finish. Mamish, 3 more minutes. So the kids, the first teretz we're saying is, in this Braita, it's a scenario where, Chevra, pay attention, 3 more minutes, Mamish, we're going to finish up. The first pshat we're saying is, that the pshat in the Braita is, it's like Rabbi Yehuda. What does the Braita mean? It's not a kasha of Yitzchak because really you're moving the mat. Letzoech dava mutar. How is it mutar? So the way we're saying it is because you had kavanah before Shabbat to use these chalot, and also B, we're saying is that you didn't put the mat in a way that would be an issue of tzad at all. You give him space. And this was all because we couldn't understand in the winter. We said Yemotag Shamim. How are you allowed to if it's not a mutter thing? There's no honey in there. Rav Ashi says the question doesn't even start. We assume when it says Big Shamim, Big Shamim means in the winter. That's what we were assuming. Rav Ashi says it's not talking about the winter. Big Shamim means, it's okay. Big Shamim means at a time that might rain or might be hot. What does it mean might rain or might be hot? It means there's times in the year that are not the winter, that sometimes rain and sometimes are hot. When are those times? You have the fall and you have the spring. In these two times, sometimes it rains, sometimes it's hot. The point is, it's saying, and those are times that there certainly is honey. That's why it's not muktzeh. So it says Rav Ashi, the question doesn't even start. Mikatani biyamot hachama or biyamot hagshamim. Did it say biyamot? It didn't say the times of the rain, meaning the winter or the summer. It said bechama mibnei hachama v'gshamim mibnei hagshamim katani. What does that mean? Biyome Nisan ubiyome Tishrei. It means in the days of Nisan, which is the spring. In the spring there is honey there, and in the Tishrei, which is the fall, there's also honey there. That's what it means. Te'ika chama ve'ika gshamim, which is a time that there is sun and there is rain. Ve'ika dvash, but at those times there certainly is honey, so it's not a muktzeh problem. So therefore the whole Braita is not a kasha at all. Okay, Chaver, we'll stop here. I don't want to go too far. Hashem, easy enough.
לא, זה לא ממש חורף.
שיכול להיות יש מחלוקת on it, according to Rav Ashi.
סתיו ואביב.
Exactly. And this is
But this is the opinion of Rav Ashi. Because
Rav Ashi explains the Braita.
Because in Chama, there is no problem at all.
Exactly. Okay, we're stopping about halfway down. Gimel with Bet. Chaver, we'll pick up Bezat Hashem, continuing a proof to Rav Yitzchak tomorrow.
אתה יקרים.